Hello, I'm Mark Riley, and I was one of the 4 people who brought you the A to Z of David Bowie podcast, alongside Rob Hughes, Howard Knock, and Jason Reed. If you're engaged in our 72 episode dive into the world of Bowie, maybe, just maybe, you will be interested in our latest endeavour. If so, you are about to take a trip into a parallel universe, a magical place in time when music papers from the 60s, 70s and 80s are still current and newsworthy, all in the company of me, Mark Riley, and Rob Hughes. Available on Patreon, each episode will either jog your memory or perhaps make you green with envy over all these momentous events that took place while you were in the pub.
Time, please.
We discuss music news of the moment, have some laughs, and even listen to some tunes. This particular episode is a taste of what you can expect when you subscribe to the Parallel Universe, available now on patreon.com. Enjoy.
You are now entering the Parallel Universe.
And wipe your feet on the way in.
With Rob Hughes
and Mark Riley.
Roxy Music play 2 low-key dates in Southport. Are there any other kind?
Oh, mate, the Floral Hall.
No,
you're right. So Southport wasn't a big venue.
No, I mean, it still isn't, is it? But we're looking here now at March 1974. And Brian was leaving the glam behind at this point in time. And he was going for the tuxedo look, wasn't he?
He was. It was all kind of changing. Obviously, Eno had left. He did leave by his own accord. He wasn't sort of pushed out, but let's just say he wasn't made particularly welcome, was he? Somebody once told me, well, you couldn't have 2 Brians in that group, So Eno had left the year before, and Eddie Jobson come in, and so the whole sort of the sound and texture of the band had changed, hadn't it? Sort of violin and keyboards more to the fore. Ferry was also starting his solo career at the same time. So this is in between, really, Country Life and Stranded, isn't it?
Yeah,
the story comes out.
Like a lot of bands, actually. Well, like Bowie, like everybody with a brain, really. Roxy Music wanted to leave the glam thing behind because they embraced it completely, didn't they? If you see them doing Virginia playing on top of the pops with the makeup and the spangly suits and all
amazing.
that. So glam, probably only out-glammed by Bowie, really. But yeah, then he went through the tuxedo phase, and it was about a year later that I saw them, previously mentioned Bellevue, King's Hall, where they were in the Army Clobber. So they were kind of doing the Bowie thing of reinventing themselves, but not as well, I would say.
Definitely not. Also on tour, Hatfield and the North and Gong to co-top a short concert tour during the second half of April, promoted by Virgin. It's a special budget price tour with 44p, the top admission at all venues. A spokesman said the package has been designed to alleviate the gloom of the present crisis. I'm guessing they're talking about the sort of political, social gloom, because it was a 3-day week and all that stuff, isn't it, rather than the musical one. But a lot of these package tours, they were sort of de rigueur, weren't they? This is a few years before Stiff and the rest of it.
Yeah, well, there was also the Charisma tours, wasn't there, which had Genesis and Van de Graaff Generator and Lindisfarne and those kind of things, all for 50p. And I'd love to have seen one of those, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the stranger appearances would be Bill Haley, who is on the Cabaret Trail.
Oh, do you know, there's a picture of him here. I mean, so this is 1974, so it's 20 years since Rock Around the Clock. And if you look at him doing Rock Around the Clock, he looks like he's in his late 40s then, didn't he? Obviously, no offence to the man.
But the funny thing is what he says, I was doing really well until this young kid came on the block and just usurped me, and it made me look cumbersome. It was Elvis Presley. Presley made everybody in the world look cumbersome in the late 50s, didn't he? So he shouldn't beat himself up.
Yeah, in a way, and Haley does say as much. He said, really, it kind of took the pressure off in a strange way. It just allowed me to do, essentially kind of live Rock Around the Clock for various other generations for years to come. That's what he was doing. He wasn't kind of wasn't reinventing the wheel from there on in.
No, and I do love this. He was playing it would have been like the Golden Garter in Wythenshawe. One of those chicken in the basket places is what he's doing. But I love the fact that he's got a compere who is introducing it, who does a bit of singing and a few jokes here and there. and he's getting like bottled and ashtrays sewn at him and all sorts, and then he decides to do Rock Around the Clock.
This is
I mean, that's like, that is the support band going on and doing the main act before they go on.
What was going through his head here? This is at the Stardust Club, isn't it? Brighouse.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, and he said So the compere has to say that cabaret time was over. Bill Haley wasn't going to play an encore, after the gig. So still dipping and diving from the battery of well-aimed missiles, he went on to commit what was surely the ultimate folly of singing Rock Around the Clock just 3 minutes after Bill Haley and the Comets had performed it themselves. What was he thinking?
He did it afterwards, right? I even got
Afterwards.
that bit wrong, right? I love this as well. It said, when Haley prepares for a show, now it takes him around 4 minutes. He changes his jacket, adjusts his tie, pats down his kiss curl, and he's ready. He seems to hold back rather on stage, only fronting the band for half the numbers. Otherwise, he just keeps to simple chords and grins enigmatically.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, this is the thing. So even back in the day, he was only in his late 20s, but he's still only 47 at this point, in 74.
Yeah, but if you think about it, I mean, he did like the Touch Pay because they were the first riots in cinemas and stuff, weren't
Yeah,
they? For the films and at gigs and everything. So we're talking about Mott the Hoople and the Royal Albert Hall ripping it to shreds, but he was the daddy.
Yeah, he was a daddy, no doubt about it. And then the piece, just very briefly, kind of follows him onto his next gig, which is in Farnworth. And it says he's in his dressing room in front of a huge dressing room mirror with a continual blubbery smile, it says, perspiring and somehow resembling a kind of amiable grapefruit. I wonder whether he read this.
Amiable Grapefruit. That's a good name for a band, that, I think.
Oh, it's a prog band there in Waiting, definitely. Stewie George, right, okay, so people who aren't familiar with Stewie George, he was David Bowie's bodyguard during the Ziggy era and beyond, actually, for a while. He later went on to look after Evel Knievel during his superstardom.
He's a bit of a legend. So there's people on the kind of the periphery, for want of a better word, of Bowie's career who became kind of a little bit iconic in their own right. Warren Peace being one. Jeff McCormack. When he turned up, when Bowie did the session for us at Maida Vale, there was a massive buzz going around because Duncan was turning up, Bowie's son, and also Jeff McCormack. Like, oh, Jeff, Warren Peace is coming on, and he turned up, and we've got to know him, and I class him as a friend now. And the only time that we ever have crosswords is about Man City and Arsenal. He's a big gooner. But one of those people was most definitely Stewie George, the driver as well. His driver was another guy who was, in the same kind of circles. But Stewie George, he actually hailed from Hull, didn't he?
Yeah, so he'd had the same background as Mick Ronson and Woody and the Rat. So he'd come out of that. So he knew everybody. That's where the connection came. And he was sort of, as I say, he was immersed in the whole club scene, from which also came people like Rick Kemp and Michael Chapman as well to some extent. But it says here, Stuart George used to be David Bowie's bodyguard. During that time, he got a cigarette in the eye, a brick across the head, numerous miscellaneous kicks and bruises, and abuse from all quarters, all in the line of duty. Now that Bowie's off the road, Stewie's gone into business on his own account with a company called Sturico, designed to be a security for the 70s for the audience as well as for the act, which is interesting. Everybody in the business has security atrocity stories to tell. Audiences, photographers, even musicians themselves have fallen under the fists of drunken clowns who are more dangerous to the peace and safety of a gig than the kids are.
It continues. Stewie knows about that one too. At one gig on Bowie's last tour, I saw him lay out a security guard hired by the hall when he was seen getting too heavy with the kids. The story is, I believe, that Mick Ronson introduced Stewie George to Bowie. That's as I understand it.
Yeah.
And there was also a story told about, it might have been working with the Rats, actually, with Mick Ronson. I could be wrong, but I think it's right. But the crowd are getting really rowdy. Right, really. A certain core of the crowd were getting, bothersome. And Stewie George just went round and put them all against the wall, like 10 guys. And he's saying, if any of you move, I'm going to clock you. And they're all just stood there, terrified with the backs to the wall. And so, a legendary hard man, but you see photographs of David Bowie, particularly there's a great shot of him running, I think, into the Hammersmith Odeon out the back of a limo, and you've just got Stewie George there, looking round and thinking, right, I'm ready, whatever happens now. And funnily enough, David Bowie did have another Stewie George later on in his life. When I got to know him a little bit, there would always be this guy with him. And if you look at photographs of David Bowie in the last probably 10 years of his life and on the last tour and previous to that as well, you will often see this guy, I think his name was Eric, but you will see this familiar face behind, and he's always concentrating and looking. You can see he's just scanning the whole situation just to make sure that there's nothing that he has to get involved in. Yeah. And of course, Bowie would need that.
Yeah, but you can imagine, though, when you think of the Stewie George in the Ziggy era, I mean, it really was. You talk about T-Rextasy and Mania, it was really starting to it went off so quickly. I mean, as we've kind of talked before on the wireless something about this, but the Ziggy tour starts off slow and it builds, and by the end of it, it is just like it's become teenage mania again. And Stewie was the only guy really employed on a full-time basis to deal with all that, all the gigs.
Yeah, the piece continues. So Stewie was getting used to being someone's personal bodyguard, and Bowie was getting used to having one. No, I was getting used to being with him. I've been doing this since I was 17. In the States, according to Stewie, some kids genuinely thought Bowie was from the outer space. They just couldn't believe that such a person actually existed, and they wanted to get to him just to see that he was human, as much as any other reason.
And then he goes on to talk about the fact that obviously Mick Ronson wanted him as security as well, I think. Stewie George is still around. I know this because you and I have a mutual friend in John Cambridge, who was Bowie's drummer before Woody, of course. And also, there's a guy, I can't remember his name now, he came to give us a quote for our bathroom a few weeks ago. So he knows Stewie quite well. And in fact, he doesn't live far from me, I believe, but he just doesn't like talking about the old days. But the guy who came to quote for our bathroom said he's got these amazing photographs. He says some of which I've seen or he's given to me, of from that time. So they're all from 72 onwards that nobody's ever seen before. And of course he's got the stories as well, but he's not particularly interested in talking about them.
There's only one person possibly from that era anyway, and her era goes right through from 1972, I believe, maybe 73 to Bowie's untimely death, and that would be Coco Schwab. And if Coco Schwab could write the definitive book on David Bowie, but we know she never will. But for that mad glam period, and as you say, slightly afterwards as well, Stewie George would probably be the one who could really, really, tell you where the bodies were buried and just give you the kind of toe-curling mad stories of what went on, because it would have been wild, but he's not doing it, and credit to him for that. Obviously Elton John, he's just been through Glastonbury and all that kind of stuff, and which would have been the highlight of his career. But I'm sure I'm right in saying that the actual highlight of his career was that he took to the runway at Manchester Airport and serenaded the Manchester City team when they got off the plane, having won the treble in Istanbul. This is a true story, Bob.
Is it really? I hadn't heard about that. Yeah. I wonder how long that would take for you to bring that up. I mean, I don't know why he was coerced, because we know, of course, he's a huge Watford fan. He used to be the chairman. I'm not sure if he's still involved on the board at Watford or not, but what's he doing hanging around with your lot?
What was this coerced word that you used, Bob? I think that he just wanted to be associated with the greatest football team on earth. Anyway, we need to move on, don't we?
Well, do you know, I just want to say right at the end of this, says he's due to star in a documentary called Aquarius on TV. Last Saturday, he was best man at Bernie Taupin's wedding when he married American Maxine Siebelman at his hometown of Market Raisin. Actually, it's Maxine Siebelman who was the inspiration for Tiny Dancer, which is one of these songs which is subject, isn't it, to urban myth. Because supposedly there was a story going around that Tiny Dancer was referring to the size of Elton's manhood.
No, I was going to mention that, and I'm glad you mentioned it before me, because it needed to be said, Bob. But beyond that, right, let's think about it, how this myth could hold water. Pardon the phrase. Would it be urine?
Well,
anyway, but Bernie Taupin... He wrote the words, so what's he doing writing a song about supposedly Elton John's penis?
Exactly.
It doesn't hold water.
That just doesn't stand up, does it? Let's face it. I
think we'll let that one just hang there, mate.
Well, pardon the phrase. All right, so we are looking at sounds here from August 1980, aren't we? And this seems to be like, I don't know, a little bit previous. A 76 punk festival is being organised at Bradford's Panache Club for October, with a major band headlining and local bands playing at what is intended to be an all-day event. The details are still being arranged, and promoter is looking for more local bands. If you're interested, phone him, and here's the number, blah, blah, blah. But it's 76 to 1980. It's a little bit kind of, isn't it early for punk nostalgia?
Nostalgia isn't what it used to be. And if you heard a clunky noise then, it wasn't me falling off my stool. It's Howard's dog Arthur, who is just the most beautiful creature in the world. And when we do a credit for me and you and Howard and Jason, and we don't mention Arthur, is very remiss. So, Arthur, you're great. Now, Blackpool, the Rebellion Festival.
Yeah.
That is always wall to wall. And if you look at the bills, they'll often have The Damned on there, and they'll have Vic Goddard and the Subway Sect, and all kind of different bands from the origins of punk. But then you've got all of these new punk bands coming through. But one thing that does make me laugh is there's a great album of the Subway Sect, Vic Goddard, and it's called We Come as Aliens. And it was because they were invited to the Rebellion Festival, which is just wall-to-wall Mohicans and leather jackets and all that kind of stuff. The Membranes play it, all that kind of stuff. He turned up in flip-flops with a Hawaiian shirt, did Vic. And that's where it came from. We come as aliens. But yeah, it seems a little bit kind of like, it's 4 years behind, 3 years behind a lot of it. It just seems a little bit kind of desperate, doesn't it?
I think it does, yeah. Talking of desperate, I don't know. I feel conflicted here. Kevin Keegan broadens his bid for world domination by releasing a single called To Be Home Again in England on Ariola this month. Magic, it says. Depending on you might have a different opinion of Keegan than I do, but obviously growing up as a Liverpool fan, he was my first idol, and I do remember crying when he signed to Hamburg, because I thought, he was just like somebody I looked up to so much. I idolised Keegan, and then he went off, and I was heartbroken, genuinely.
Yeah. No, we have a history with Kevin Keegan, and I remember crying when I first heard To Be Home Again in England. But he was Man City's manager.
He was. Yes.
I used to go and see City train. I used to know the guy who was on the door at Carrington, Malcolm, brilliant guy, and he just used to let me in. So there'd be people all on the other side of the fences, just watching City, and we were struggling at that point in time.
Yes.
Make no bones about it. But not now. But anyway, Bob. So there'd be a lot of people there looking from the other side, and I'd be in there just watching them. But at that point in time, I know this is a bit Radio 5, sorry, but they didn't train properly. They just used to play five-a-side against each other, and that's why we were crap. And so my memories of Kevin Keegan are a little bit more hollow than yours, which is fair to say. But his records, Hoddle and Waddle, was it Diamond Lights?
Diamond Lights. I mean,
why bother?
I don't know. I mean, obviously Keegan had head over heels in love. He did fancy himself as a pop star, didn't he, with the requisite perm and everything?
Yeah, and fair enough to him. But we're not going to play it, are we?
We aren't.
Let's not. No.
Obviously, you've sort of interviewed Fripp, haven't you? I've met him as well, and he was just like charm personified. He was just a fascinating character, as you would imagine, and you kind of see different sides of him. But I know one of the things he has talked about in the past is that no one member, it's a bit like a football team, that old sort of cliche, no one member of King Crimson is bigger than the rest. But you've always at the centre of that. It couldn't be King Crimson without Fripp, could it? No. So it's all right for him to say.
What are you saying, Bob? Believe you me saying no one member of King Crimson is bigger than the band itself. Except for me. Because
exactly
he does all these monologues to it, and the interview, Bill Bruford comes across really, really well. It's interesting. It's a bit long, I think, but it does become, if I'm honest, and I'm a massive fan, and to have met him, and he did his Strippertronics in a room with Mark Radcliffe and I, it was an honour. And of course, the records that he's played on with King Crimson and Bowie and everybody else.
Of course.
But it was just him. His monologues to camera were just kind of unfathomable and a little bit
maybe
tiresome.
It was all a bit preconceived and deliberately obtuse. But I think that the thing with Toyah, I think, came about because, just because for the hell of it, I suppose. But also, I remember him saying a few years back, you get to a certain age where people stop really looking at you. It's a bit like that whole pensioner thing, where you're almost invisible, so you can really do what you like. So in his younger days, of course, he would never have done something like that because it would have harmed everything he was doing creatively and artistically. Whereas now, he can just do it and the reputation's intact. It's just, here's another weird thing that Robert Fripp's doing.
Okay, so at this point in proceedings, I am going to introduce to this particular programme a brand new feature, Bob, called Anagram Parsons. Can you guess what the actual concept of the whole thing is?
Oh, is it about country music, Mark?
No, it's about anagrams, innit, Bob?
Oh, Anagram Parsons. Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Of course it is. Okay, so we give out 3 clues, but we also, understandably, give out the words which have the letters within to give the name of the band that we are looking for. So, all right then, Bob, give us the words.
Okay, the words are I'd Try Breathy Path. So I'd try breathy path.
Now, I know you struggle with this part of it, Bob, so I'll spell it.
That's it.
IDTRYBREATHYPATH. As Bob eloquently said, I'd try breathy path. 3 clues to follow. Moving on now then, Bobbert, to On the Box. The highlights, well, I'm glad that the enemy agree with me on this particular point. What is it?
Well, it says here, Steptoe and Son are back on BBC Two. 7 repeats from the classic series begin with Harold looking after his ailing dad in Upstairs, Downstairs. This one from 1974. Do you want a bit of a plot summary here?
Go on, Bob.
So Albert's done his back in and the doctor orders bed rest since it's not serious enough to warrant hospital admission. Harold is run ragged, climbing up and down the stairs to wait on him hand and foot and carrying him to the toilet. And when Albert's back clicks back into place, he maintains the illusion of illness, but Harold has noticed beer and sweets have gone missing, and so he lays a trap.
Now, it's weird, you know, because my daughters, they look at some of the things that we still find hilarious, you know, and obviously, I mean, Dad's Army is a good kind of example of this, because they look at us when we're watching Dad's Army and chuckling, and obviously it's very innocent and all that kind of stuff, but there's some brilliant gags in there, and Steptoe and Son had more than Dad's Army in the way of cynicism, didn't it? It was really dark.
Absolutely. I mean, that was such a strange relationship. It's based on such an odd dynamic in the first place, wasn't it? But comedy abounds.
Oh, I mean, I absolutely love it. One of my favourite sitcoms, but I love the fact that this could well have been a precursor. I don't know if Stephen King ever saw it. Right, okay. But as we know, Harold has noticed certain things going missing when his dad's supposed to be bedridden upstairs, right? And he clocks him and finds him out. Now, what happens in Misery? Can you remember?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, it's James Caan, and he's kind of coming out of his wheelchair, isn't he? And secretly getting fit again and pretending he's still ill.
Yeah, but when she comes back, she notices that there's a glass penguin turned the wrong way round, Bob.
True.
I am thinking that Stephen King probably was a big fan of Steptoe and Son, and he nicked the plot. And so I don't know if he's going to take us to court. I mean, I'm supposing that he will be subscribing to the parallel universe, so he will hear this. But if you think you're hard enough, Stephen, come on.
You know, he's quite a big guy. Have you seen him? I wouldn't mess with Stephen King.
I wouldn't mess with his lawyers either, actually. I take it back. So Echo and the Bunnymen, brackets Bunnymen, etc., claimed in a Guardian feature that a major influence on them was the Canadian poet laureate Harry Stenchcloth. Now, the band made no bones, though, that by far away the biggest beacon for them was a miserable croon of Leonard Cohen, the brother of former England fullback George. And so, do you know what? I did an interview quite recently, and it was with the Quietus, all about the parallel universe that we're doing now. And I was mentioning the fact that the different stages of the papers, which we've discussed, you know, so it's 60s quite innocent, 70s quite dark, 80s very flippant, and 90s, and also the fact that Stuart McConey made stories up, like Bob Holness playing saxophone on Baker Street and all that kind of stuff. And this is another good example of it, because there's nothing to be gleaned from that at all, apart from somebody taking the mickey out of Echo and the Bunnymen and Harry Stenchcloth, should he exist.
There is something to be gleaned, because they were big fans of Leonard Cohen, but that's about the only thing to be gleaned, isn't there? Well, the thing about sort of made up stories and smoke and mirrors and all the rest of it is still, you have to still go and do your research just in case there really was a Canadian poet laureate called Harry Stenchcloth.
But there wasn't, was there?
There wasn't, I've checked.
Right, good man.
On the news front, Public Image Limited's new album is a live set entitled Paris au Printemps. Recorded in Paris in March this year. The LP is unusual in 2 respects, it says. The group have taken the French connection to its logical conclusion by having the entire record sleeve printed in French. So the band's name becomes Image Publique, SA.
Right, what does the SA stand for, Bob?
And songs like Chant, Careering and Pop Tones become Salmodie, Précipitamment and Tombe de Pop, respectively.
Really
Thank
good,
you.
Bob. I'm glad you handled that, man. I didn't.
I'm here all
It's got a
week.
great cover, hasn't it? Which was seemingly actually painted by Lydon himself.
Well, it says the sleeve boasts a cover painted by Lydon, which he reckons depicts himself, Keith Levine, and Jeanette Lee. So it's a strange one, isn't it? A little bit surreal. I couldn't work out whether the main sort of figure there, sort of looming in the background, is a giant vulture or not. Do you think it's some kind of like Himalayan beast?
It looks like a gorilla with its shoulders up and its arms down to me. But the other two beasts, they look a little bit like maybe a llama. But do you know? I don't know if you ever do this, Bob. I'm sure you do. But whenever you're eating cashew nuts, do you stick two in the front of your mouth like fangs? Because I'm sure that's just a couple of donkeys with cashew nuts and they're messing about with each other.
I have done that before, yeah, but not for quite some time, so I know exactly where you're coming from. But yeah, that could very well be it.
One other thing that does feature predominantly in the magazines of this era, you could buy clothes from the back of the NME. And I love this one. So this is Clash gear. So you've got bondage jacket, PVC straights, Clash jeans, zip T-shirts, motorbike jacket, drill straight. So it's not really exactly the Clash kind of uniform, but they've got a picture of the Clash here. And it is basically, you think, I want to look like the Clash, and you can do it all in one place based in Bristol.
They're trying to marry two worlds together, aren't they? There's no Clash affiliation there whatsoever. No endorsement, nothing. Just a big black and white, great, moody black and white picture there and a list of clothes you can buy.
Definitely. Now, at least, it's a drawing, a picture, and it's quite crude. It's just black and white, and it's just a block print, really, and you can't really tell any detail in the Clash clothing. But moving on to 20-pleat Bowie pants, would you like... I want to pass this over to you, Bob, please.
I'll have to describe it. So, obviously, the Clash advert's a good one. This is all hand-drawn. It's a sort of thing you might expect somebody at school, perhaps a 16 or 17-year-old, to do. But it's an advert, essentially, for 20-pleat Bowie pants, terribly drawn. There is a picture, which I'm guessing is Bowie. It kind of looks a bit like him, but they haven't actually put any detail on, apart from these very, very pleated pants that he's wearing. And the microphone. It's got the sizes here. You've got them, let's see, colours black, blue, red, white, maroon, and then it says you can send a cheque or cash to the alien, and gives an address in Bolton in Lancashire, and refunds given, it says, in goods if goods are unsatisfactory. It is a terrible advert. The £15, by the way, 1980, that was probably, I don't know, standard, wasn't it? It's terrible. And there's no Bowie endorsement.
There is definitely no Bowie endorsement, but I'm just wondering how many aliens lived in Bolton at that particular point in time. But not only that, what I really love about it, as you say, the illustration is so very, very poor, but also, apart from Glass Spider, perhaps, this is I'm only speaking personally, my least favourite Bowie look. So it's kind of those big daft pants that he wore on the stage tour. And so if there's anything that I wouldn't want from Bowie's wardrobe, at that point in time, because, of course, at this point in time, Glass Spider hadn't happened, it would be them pants.
1980, we'd had punk, we're in the post-punk era, perhaps wondering where music is going. It's the same kind of thing in the air. Is rock and roll dead? Is the guitar music dead? Especially with the advent of synth pop as well, which seemed to usher in perhaps, an uncertain era, but, a different kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's funny because I call it the old man's disease, whereby when you hear a tune, you think, oh yeah, that sounds like that. Oh, yeah, I remember that, and there's some bands I remember in the 80s, I think, yeah, I've heard the Velvet Underground, I don't need to hear this again, but not everybody had heard the Velvet Underground, and it's kind of the Victor Meldrew kind of look, isn't it? It's, looking back and saying things were great, that's the way it should have been, and now it's all going awry. And of course it wasn't, because music is more popular now than ever, and we are still looking back at all of these magazines. Like I say, if you're looking back at 50 years worth of music publications, so it wasn't just a fish and chip wrapper, was it? It was something that people want to have a look at.
And it's also easy to overlook the fact that one person's old is another person's new. That's the way it's always worked, hasn't it? People are discovering artist bands at different times in their lives, and it's meaning different things, and they're bringing their own experience to it. So there's always a fresh angle somewhere. That's how it tends to work. And one of the magazines I write for, Classic Rock, seems to go through this every maybe 5, 6, 7 years, where they have it's a big piece, big debate. Is rock and roll dead? Is this the end of rock as we know it? And of course it isn't. Somehow it always replenishes itself, and it's a cycle, an ongoing cycle.
Okay, so upcoming gigs of the week. Well,
look at this. It's a, I don't know, quarter page ad here. Teardrop Explodes, The Fall, Joseph K, Thompson Twins, and the Fire Engines at the Lyceum. That's Sunday the 16th of November. Go on. I know you've got a story here.
Well, I mean, I had to get in touch with the Falls Mr. Memory Man, which is Paul Hanley. Hello, Paul.
Hi.
He won't be subscribing. He can't afford £1 a week. So the Fall, for some reason or other, didn't play. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it was because the Teardrop Explodes were at the top of the poster and Mark saw it. That wouldn't surprise me.
Fair enough.
But if you look at it, it's a guy called John Curd who ran Straight Music Presents, Straight Music, the organisation. And he was a colourful character. I do remember these Lyceum Sunday night shows were legendary. We did a fair few of them. One called Gig of the Century with the Gang of Four and the Mekons and the Human League and Stiff Little Fingers. And it was at that particular one. We played there quite a lot. We headlined it as well. We had Felt opening for us on one particular occasion. But I do remember we played with Stiff Little Fingers, as I say, on this Gig of the Century. And there were a lot of Stiff Little Fingers fans who were a bit more vociferous than the other fans. You can imagine, Gang of Four, quite arty, Mekons again, and Human League, and then the Fall, pretty off kilter. But all the people down the front seemed to be waiting with bated breath for Stiff Little Fingers, who seemed, a little bit kind of incongruous on that bill, really. Didn't really fit in quite so well. And I do remember that I was wearing a pair of the drummer's brothel creepers, or beetle crushers, if you like. And his feet were at least one size, probably 2 sizes bigger than mine. And so it was like I was walking around on planks of wood. They were very, very clunky and not at all comfortable. But I do remember at one point in time, this scrote, I'm sure he won't mind me calling him that, jumped out of the crowd. I don't know how, because the Lyceum stage was very, very tall. He jumped over I was watching him, and he was swearing at us and shouting at us and all that while we're on. He jumped over the railing, onto the stage, thumped Mark Smith, and then turned round quickly, and I was the closest to him. I kicked him up the backside, and he went flying back into the crowd. But I will remember it like it was yesterday. This brothel creeper shoe was just about hanging on my toe. So my foot was still in the air, and it was swinging back and forth, and it was that close to following this scrote into the crowd. And I got off and went down, tied it up again as best I could, and carried on. And the funny thing is, there was an American version of the Live at the Witch Trials debut album by The Fall, and it's got a different cover on it than the usual line drawing, and it is a photograph from that gig, and you can kind of see, it looks like I'm stood on 2 bricks. I'm not.
Well, brilliant.
I'm in the drummer's shoes. But yeah, those Sunday night gigs that John Curd used to put on. But that's the end of the story. I do remember, as we carried on, John Curd, he was a big guy, might still be a big guy, don't know if he's still with us. He just went through the crowd, and it parted, and he just grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, dragged him right back through the crowd, and I saw him bumping him up against the wall at the side of the Lyceum, like, boom, don't do that again. Boom, while we're carrying on.
Amazing. So if your brothel creeper, I know it wasn't yours, you borrowed it, but if that had flung into the crowd there, would he have gone chasing after it?
I don't think so. The albums, just to have a cursory glance, we've got Stevie Wonder, Hotter Than July, Status Quo, Just Supposing, which again, I don't know too well. And though I do recognise within the review here, they kind of think that they're softening round the edges. But some of the tunes on this album are pretty straightforward Quo. It's not like it's got Margarita Time or, the one about the army.
In the army now.
In the army now. It's not that bad.
Yeah, you might think they're called Status Quo because they never change, it says, but that's simply not true. On one hand, they still can't count past 12, but on the other, they've got richer, older, and more self-conscious. It does say that men who ride in limos acquire pretensions, and Status Quo's pretension these days is to quality. They like their records to sound sharp, polished, even well-crafted. A definite touch of the ABBAs, alas. What's with the alas? What's wrong with ABBA?
Absolutely. Did them no harm, did it? Okay, then going to the classifieds now. We've got lots of fan clubs here. The Kiss Army Fan Club, which is based in London. Led Zeppelin magazine, Tight But Loose, which is available from Bedford. The official Piranhas fan club. So the Piranhas never really struck me as a band who might need a fan club. No offence to anybody, but which, as we know, just means offence to everybody. But particularly the Piranhas. But that was based in Brighton, which is where the Piranhas were based. So you have to wonder whether they generated their own fan club.
Oh, you're saying that's a made-up name there on the fan club address, Mark?
Could possibly be.
Possibly, yeah.
Thanks for listening to this taster episode of the Parallel Universe. If you want to hear more, join us by searching for Parallel Universe on patreon.com.
Prepare to exit the parallel universe.
And shut the door on your way out.